He was the master of Shakespeare, the soul of British cinema, and the patriarch of one of acting's greatest dynasties. But behind Sir Michael Redgrave's towering presence on stage and screen lay a storm of secrets, struggles, and silent suffering. From Hamlet's soliloquy to personal tragedy, from public triumphs to private torment, this is the unforgettable story of the actor who played 1,000 roles while hiding one.
Nobody will be entitled to accuse you of murder. They will say you were not a party to it, and so will you, and you. But what will your conscience say? And yours, and yours. It is in your hands today to decide whether or not these men shall ever again enter that death trap.
Before we uncover the fascinating layers of Michael Redgrave's life, from glory to grief, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, so you never miss a timeless story from Sajjad Classic. Michael Scudamore. Redgrave was born on March 20th, 1908, in the culturally rich city of Bristol, England, into a world already steeped in performance and poetry. The stage wasn't just in his future, it was in his blood. His father, Roy Redgrave, was a pioneering figure of the silent film era, a name that flickered across the screens of early British cinema. His mother, Margaret Scudamore, graced the theatre with elegance and poise, an established stage actress in her own right. With such a pedigree, it seemed Michael was destined for the spotlight. But destiny, as it often does, arrived with complications. Only months after his birth, his parents' marriage unraveled. Roy Redgrave left, first emotionally, then physically, moving to Australia and starting a new life entirely. Michael was just a baby when his father vanished from the family picture, leaving young Michael to be raised solely by his mother, Margaret. She became both caretaker and guiding light, instilling in him a love for language, literature, and the arts. Yet, for all his admiration of his parents' theatrical roots, young Michael also grew up with a sense of abandonment. The absence of his father left a shadow over his childhood, a void that would echo quietly throughout his life and relationships. But this early turmoil also planted the seeds of emotional depth that he would later bring to every stage he stood on and every screen he lit up. He was educated at Clifton College and later studied at Magdalen College, Cambridge, where he developed an interest in teaching and literature before fully committing to the theatre. For a brief time, Redgrave worked as a schoolmaster at Cranleigh School, teaching English and directing school plays, a foreshadowing of the greatness to come. Long before the cameras rolled and the cinema lights dimmed, Michael Redgrave was a man of the stage. In 1934, at the age of 26, Redgrave made his professional stage debut at the Liverpool Playhouse, a respected training ground for young British actors. Though fresh out of academia and a brief stint as a schoolteacher, Redgrave brought with him a remarkable presence, tall, articulate, and classically trained in both literature and voice. Even in small roles, he displayed a subtle gravitas that hinted at deeper layers beneath the surface. The Liverpool Playhouse was no mere provincial theatre. It was a powerhouse of talent where actors were expected to rehearse one play by day and perform another by night, building discipline, versatility, and stamina. This grueling schedule suited Redgrave perfectly, and it became his foundation. A new actor had arrived, one who could stand comfortably in both the high art of Shakespeare and the witty elegance of Coward's modern dramas. From there, Redgrave's reputation soared. He was soon welcomed into the Old Vic Company, where he would tackle the great roles of the classical canon, Hamlet, Macbeth, Lear, and soon after make the leap to cinema. But Redgrave wasn't content to remain only on stage. The camera came calling. For Redgrave, the stage, though beloved, was not the end of the road. It was a beginning. As the 1930s unfolded and cinema began to rival the prestige of theatre, Redgrave felt the pull of the silver screen. British film was evolving, seeking a new generation of actors who could bring intelligence, elegance, and authenticity to their roles. And so, with the same courage that led him from the classroom to the theatre, Redgrave made another bold leap, this time into film.
Who are you? What do you want?
Recognize the signature tune?
Will you please get out?
Oh, this is a much better room. Definitely an acceptable room.
The Lady Vanishes, 1938. The film that made Redgrave a star. It was 1938. Tensions in Europe were rising, and British cinema was still struggling to be taken seriously on the world stage. Then came The Lady Vanishes, a suspense thriller directed by Alfred Hitchcock, his last film before heading to Hollywood. And at the heart of it all, a relatively unknown stage actor named Michael Redgrave. He wasn't supposed to be a movie star. In fact, Redgrave had built his reputation in the theater, precise, articulate, deeply committed to the craft. But Hitchcock saw something in him. Cast as Gilbert, a charming, sharp-tongued musicologist, Redgrave didn't just play the part, he owned it. From the moment he stepped on screen, Redgrave exuded a different kind of screen presence. Not the brooding intensity of a Gable or the dashing bravado of a Flynn. This was charisma born of intelligence and wit. Paired with the equally luminous Margaret Lockwood, their chemistry was magnetic. The flirtation between their characters sparkled with dry humor and layered nuance, never forced, always natural. At its core, the film was about a mysterious disappearance aboard a train. But Gilbert and Iris, the amateur sleuths at the center of the storm, were the soul of the story. Redgrave's performance walked a tightrope, playful without being flippant, clever but never smug. And when the suspense escalated, so did his depth. It was a role that demanded both levity and courage, and he delivered both in spades. Critics took notice immediately. The New York Times hailed him as a revelation, praising his dry humor and effortless elegance. Graham Greene, then reviewing films, called Redgrave's performance light and intelligent, never sacrificing charm for wit. C.A. Lejeune of The Observer added that Redgrave gave the film its emotional weight, cool without being cold, smart without arrogance. It was rare praise for a newcomer, but Redgrave wasn't just another fresh face. He was bringing the discipline of stage acting into cinema, blending voice control, timing, and body language in a way that felt modern, even revolutionary. The Lady Vanishes was a hit, both in Britain and abroad. Today, with a 7.8 IMDb rating and a revered place in film history, it's considered one of the finest British films ever made. But perhaps its greatest legacy lies in what it did for Michael Redgrave. That train ride through fictional Europe became his own journey into cinematic legend. From that moment on, he wasn't just a respected stage actor. He was a bona fide star, one who would redefine what it meant to be a British leading man, articulate, relatable, and unforgettable. For Redgrave, The Lady Vanishes wasn't just his film debut. It was his launch pad. The moment he left behind the chalkboard of the classroom and stepped onto a screen where the world was finally watching. And he made sure they never looked away again.
You know me. Bravo! 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 I can't go me! Stop here! Here! You fool!
Dead of Night, 1945. Of World War II, when British audiences were seeking a return to normalcy, Ealing Studios delivered something completely unexpected. A chilling horror anthology that would not only unsettle its viewers but make cinematic history. The film was Dead of Night, a surreal blend of supernatural tales wrapped in a haunting framing story. But buried within its 5 eerie episodes was one that would steal the show, shock critics, and showcase Michael Redgrave like never before. The Ventriloquist's Dummy. Redgrave as Maxwell Frere, the haunted ventriloquist. In this unforgettable segment, Redgrave plays Maxwell Frere, a tormented ventriloquist whose dummy, Hugo, appears to have a mind of its own. What begins as a quirky character study slowly unravels into a psychological nightmare. Redgrave's performance is astonishing. His portrayal of Frere, caught in a descent into paranoia and identity breakdown, is both sympathetic and deeply disturbing. He doesn't rely on makeup or theatrics. He uses his eyes, his voice, his subtle tremors. The anguish is real, the madness palpable. He seamlessly switches between Frere's tortured self and the sinister, mocking presence of Hugo. The dummy may be made of wood, but Redgrave gives it life. Or perhaps it's the other way around. Critics were quick to recognize the brilliance of this performance. David Thompson, one of cinema's most respected historians, wrote, "Redgrave's turn in Dead of Night remains one of the most terrifying and tragic portraits of mental collapse ever put on screen." Empire magazine later ranked Dead of Night among the top British horror films of all time, praising Redgrave's segment as so psychologically rich it transcends horror and enters the realm of tragedy. In 2004, the BFI, British Film Institute, declared the film a landmark in British cinema, citing Redgrave's performance as its unshakable centerpiece. The dummy Hugo was so disturbing that some crew members reportedly refused to stay alone on set with it after filming. Redgrave was initially hesitant to accept the role, fearing it might be too extreme or melodramatic. But once he committed, he reportedly threw himself into the performance so fully that he lost weight and suffered insomnia during filming. The segment's psychological depth was so profound that it inspired later Hollywood thrillers like Magic, 1978, with Anthony Hopkins, and even influenced characters like Chucky in horror pop culture. The film's nonlinear structure and eerie tone made it an influence on directors like Martin Scorsese and Guillermo del Toro, both of whom cited Dead of Night as a key inspiration in blending genre with character psychology. Even today, with horror having evolved into graphic extremes, Redgrave's portrayal of Maxwell Frere remains bone-chilling, not because of gore, but because it taps into a deeper fear, the loss of one's identity, the slow cracking of the mind.
Oh, Vinny, there's only one way out of this hell. Let's go now and confess and pay the penalty and find peace together.
Morning Becomes Electra, 1947. Greek tragedy in an American shell. In 1947, Hollywood dared to do something few had attempted before: turn a modernized Greek tragedy, Eugene O'Neill's epic drama, into a lavish motion picture. The result was Morning Becomes Electra, a sweeping, brooding adaptation of O'Neill's stage masterpiece. At the heart of it stood Michael Redgrave as Oren Mannon, a man tormented by war, mother love, guilt, and madness. The story, from ancient Greece to Civil War America. Based on the Oresteia trilogy by Aeschylus, O'Neill's version transplants the Greek myth to post-Civil War New England. Oren Mannon, Redgrave, a Union Army officer, returns home from the war to find his family drenched in secrets and betrayal. His father, General Ezra Mannon, has just died, under suspicious circumstances. His mother, Christine, played by Katina Paxinou, is involved in an affair with Adam Brandt and may have poisoned Ezra. Oren, psychologically scarred from the war and unnaturally attached to his mother, spirals into obsession, vengeance, and emotional collapse. This is no simple murder drama, it's a psychological labyrinth, where love curdles into obsession and justice breeds madness. Film historian David Thompson later wrote, "Redgrave doesn't play Oren Mannon, he bleeds him out inch by inch. His descent into madness is operatic but utterly human." Some critics noted that his performance leaned into stage stylization. But in a film this rooted in theatrical tradition, it felt fitting. Time magazine noted, "Redgrave brings Shakespearean depth to a man breaking under mythic burdens." Michael Redgrave had just arrived in Hollywood as a respected British actor. This was his first major American film role, and it immediately earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Actor, his only one. To prepare for the role, Redgrave revisited classic Greek tragedies, studying the myth of Orestes to understand Oren's psychological layers. In one interview, Redgrave said, "Playing Oren was like being trapped inside a coffin for 2 hours. I adored it." For Redgrave, it marked his arrival as a world-class actor, capable of dominating both the stage and the screen with tragic majesty.
He swore that he never intended to murder, that what he hoped for was an ultimate and lasting love, but something. He spoke of an unholy emanation from this room, drove him inevitably to kill.
Secret Beyond the Door, 1947. The premise, Gothic romance meets psycho-thriller. Redgrave plays Mark Lamphere, a wealthy and enigmatic architect who marries a beautiful magazine editor named Celia, played by Joan Bennett. But what starts as a whirlwind romance soon darkens into a web of secrets and psychological dread. After their honeymoon, Celia arrives at Mark's grand, eerie mansion, a place filled with locked rooms and odd silences. One room in particular is sealed off, a room Mark forbids her to enter. A room that holds something. But what? As Celia begins to uncover her husband's past and obsessions, including his fascination with real-life cases of wives murdered by their husbands, the film spirals into a haunting psychological mystery. Michael Redgrave's performance. Redgrave's portrayal of Mark is a masterclass in restraint and tension. At times suave and composed, at others twitchy and emotionally frayed, he walks the line between romantic lead and possible murderer with unnerving skill. He gives the character an almost Hitchcockian duality, charming on the surface, but clearly disturbed beneath. His stammering confessions, sudden mood swings, and icy detachment create an atmosphere that's as claustrophobic as the locked room itself. Critics' take. The New York Times, 1947, remarked, "Redgrave's Mark Lamphere is a performance balanced on the edge of madness. It's not simply fear we sense, but sorrow, repression, and guilt. He gives the film its eerie heartbeat." Time magazine called his role a curious blend of gentleman and ghost. Redgrave brings sophistication to a part that could have easily slipped into melodrama. Notably, while the film divided critics at the time for its surreal and sometimes dreamlike approach, many praised Redgrave's performance as one of the most emotionally layered in noir cinema. The movie's theme was inspired by the real-life Bluebeard legends, tales of men who murdered their wives and kept their secrets locked away. Redgrave reportedly worked closely with Lang to understand the psychological trauma of his character, crafting Mark Lamphere not as a villain, but as a deeply damaged man. Joan Bennett, Redgrave's co-star, later revealed in interviews that Redgrave remained quiet and introspective during shooting, often lost in character between takes. Here, he wasn't the dashing hero. He was the mystery, the riddle waiting to be solved. It was a risk, and Redgrave leaned into it. He played not just the man, but the mind behind the man. And in doing so, he gave noir fans a villain you couldn't quite hate, and a victim you couldn't quite trust. For Redgrave, it was yet another layer added to an already complex and rich career.
I am sorry. I am sorry, because I have failed to give you what you had the right to demand of me as your teacher. Sympathy, encouragement, and humanity.
The Browning version, 1951. In 1951, Michael Redgrave delivered a performance so raw, so profoundly human, that it not only earned him international acclaim, it became the defining role of his career. The film was the Browning version, adapted from Terence Rattigan's quietly devastating one-act play. It was a chamber drama, no car chases, no flashy dialogue, just a crumbling man, a dead marriage, and the unbearable silence of a life slipping into irrelevance. Redgrave as Andrew Crocker Harris, the Himmler of the lower fifth. Redgrave played Andrew Crocker Harris, a once brilliant classics teacher at an English public school, now emotionally exhausted and physically ill, forced into early retirement. His students mock him, his colleagues pity him, and his wife despises him. Known among pupils as the Himmler of the lower fifth, he is cold, mechanical, and seemingly heartless. But beneath that severe facade lies a man deeply wounded by years of failure and unexpressed emotion. And Redgrave, in what critics often describe as a masterclass in understatement, shows us every shade of that internal struggle, not with outbursts, but with silences, a flicker of the eye, a stammer, a pause too long before a line. It's a performance where every word feels measured, every gesture meaningful. At the 1951 Cannes Film Festival, Redgrave was awarded Best Actor, with judges praising his performance as one of quiet devastation.
At all events, it didn't take much discernment on my part to realize that I had become an utter failure as a schoolmaster. Still, stupidly enough, I had not realized that I was also feared.
The New York Times hailed his portrayal as a miracle of precision and pathos. Redgrave turns what could have been a stiff cliché into a breathing, heartbreaking soul. Legendary critic Pauline Kael called it possibly the most moving performance ever given by a male actor in British cinema. Perhaps the most unforgettable moment comes when a student gives Crocker Harris a parting gift. A copy of Robert Browning's translation of Aeschylus, accompanied by a simple message of gratitude. Redgrave's reaction is wordless for several seconds, but in that silence, we see a man undone.
I don't actually know who I am by birth. I was found.
Found?
In a handbag.
A handbag?
In the cloakroom at Victoria Station.
The Importance of Being Earnest, 1952. By 1952, Michael Redgrave had already proven himself a master of drama and psychological depth. But in The Importance of Being Earnest, he took on something entirely different, the elegant, razor-sharp wit of Oscar Wilde. Directed by Anthony Asquith, this lavish Technicolor adaptation of Wilde's most famous play was a loving tribute to the elegance of Victorian satire, and Redgrave stepped into the role of Jack Worthing, a seemingly respectable gentleman who leads a double life. On the surface, it's all drawing rooms and cucumber sandwiches, but beneath the charm and farce lies a masterclass in comic timing and theatrical intelligence, and Redgrave delivers both in abundance. Redgrave as Jack Worthing, or Earnest as he calls himself in the city, is the ultimate Wildine paradox. A proper gentleman living an improper lie. He has invented a fictitious brother, Earnest, so he can escape his country responsibilities and indulge in London's social scene. Michael Redgrave portrays Jack with a gleaming mix of exasperation, wit, and dry humor. While others in the film lean into the theatricality, Redgrave plays it cool, a master of understatement. His reactions are priceless, often saying more in a raised eyebrow than others do in a monologue. One of the film's most memorable moments is Jack's standoff with Lady Bracknell, played by the formidable Edith Evans, over his origins. Her iconic line, "A handbag," has become part of British film legend, but Redgrave's restrained, bewildered response grounds the comedy in human embarrassment. Critics adored the film, and particularly Redgrave's understated performance. The New York Times praised him as an actor of rare intelligence. Redgrave's Jack is less a buffoon and more a man quietly drowning in his own contradictions. Variety wrote, Redgrave balances Wilde's verbal gymnastics with warmth and believability, never letting the wit feel cold. This 1952 film adaptation is considered the definitive version of The Importance of Being Earnest and is still used in classrooms and theatrical workshops around the world. Director Anthony Asquith deliberately cast stage-trained actors to preserve the rhythmic elegance of Wilde's dialogue. Redgrave, trained in Shakespeare and Coward, was the perfect fit. Though a comedy, Redgrave approached the role with serious discipline. He rehearsed scenes repeatedly to get Wilde's timing just right, ensuring that the humor felt organic, not over-rehearsed. The film was entered into the 1953 Cannes Film Festival and was lauded for its faithful adaptation and exquisite performances. Redgrave's performance continues to be studied by actors seeking to master the art of playing comedy with sincerity.
When I got back to Weybridge, they sent for me and told me that the people in Whitehall had decided that I was making a nuisance of myself, wasting everybody's time, including my own, and that the whole thing was dropped.
What did you do?
Well, the only thing I could do, I resigned.
The Dam Busters, 1955. By the mid-1950s, Michael Redgrave had already proven himself a master of psychological depth and emotional complexity. But in The Dam Busters, he took a different path, one grounded in precision, intellect, and restrained heroism. Here, Redgrave stepped into the real-life shoes of Dr. Barnes Wallis, the brilliant British engineer who developed the bouncing bomb during World War II, a revolutionary weapon designed to destroy heavily protected German dams. This wasn't a romantic lead. It wasn't a tortured soul. Instead, Redgrave portrayed something much rarer on screen: the quiet genius, fighting his war not with bullets but with brains. The role: Redgrave as Barnes Wallis. As Wallis, Redgrave brings a cerebral intensity to the screen. He's not flamboyant or emotionally expressive. In fact, much of his performance is defined by stillness. But within that stillness is a man driven by patriotic urgency and relentless innovation. He delivers long stretches of technical dialogue, equations, flight angles, water displacement, with utter conviction, making the science feel not just understandable, but thrilling. Yet it's in the private moments, when Wallis fears that his invention may cause more harm than good, that Redgrave injects heart into the brainy role. The Times, London, hailed Redgrave's performance as understated, deeply human, and brimming with moral complexity. His portrayal of Wallis gives the film its conscience. Film historian Charles Barr later noted, "In portraying Wallis, Redgrave gave us a rare wartime hero, not a soldier with a gun, but a man with a slide rule and a conscience." Redgrave reportedly met with Barnes Wallis before shooting, studying his mannerisms, speech, and passion for engineering to portray him authentically. Wallis was deeply moved by Redgrave's portrayal and called it remarkably faithful. The real bouncing bomb required incredible precision to work. Spun backwards and dropped at exactly the right height and speed to skip across water, evade torpedo nets, and explode against dam walls. Redgrave's delivery of this complex science gave it clarity and urgency. Though the dam busters focused primarily on the mission, Redgrave's scenes as Wallis gave the film its emotional grounding. A man wrestling with the knowledge that his invention, while ingenious, could cost countless lives. The Dam Busters remains one of the most celebrated British war films of all time. It wasn't just a story of wartime bravery, it was a tribute to the men behind the curtain, the thinkers, the inventors. And Michael Redgrave's performance ensured that Barnes Wallis would be remembered not just as an engineer, but as a man of conscience and quiet courage. This wasn't the flamboyant Redgrave of the Lady Vanishes, or the emotionally broken teacher of the Browning version. This was Redgrave the craftsman, inhabiting a historical figure with humility, intelligence, and restraint.
The following night I dined with some of them and told them of the dream.
And you say I was in it?
Yes.
And it was a twin-engine plane, a Dakota.
Yes, that's right.
Well, all I can say is I'm glad we're going in a Liberator and not a Dakota.
But we are going in a Dakota.
The Night My Number came up, 1955. What if someone dreamed your death down to the exact details? Would you still board that plane? That's the chilling premise of The Night My Number Came Up, a 1955 British suspense thriller that blends supernatural unease with military precision. And at its calm, commanding center is Michael Redgrave as Air Marshal Hardy. The plot: loosely based on a real-life account told by Air Marshal Sir Victor Goddard, the film unfolds with eerie restraint. Redgrave plays Air Marshal Hardy, a rational, no-nonsense officer traveling to Japan. The twist? The night before, at a dinner party, a fellow guest shares a vivid dream: a plane crash, with Hardy and several others on board. The dream is so specific, it describes the aircraft, the passengers, even the final moments before the crash, that it seems impossible to ignore. As the events of the dream begin to line up with reality, the same passengers, the same weather, the same delays, paranoia mounts. Is the dream a warning or just coincidence? Hardy must decide: trust logic or fear fate. This is not a showy role, but that's what makes it powerful. As Air Marshal Hardy, Redgrave is the embodiment of British reserve, stoic, composed, mildly skeptical. Yet behind his clipped speech and polite calm, you can sense the rising tension. He never overplays it. His eyes do the heavy lifting, calculating, reassessing, silently wondering if his fate has already been sealed. Radio Times later praised his quiet authority, saying, Redgrave elevates the film by underplaying the terror. He's not a man gripped by fear, but a man logically trying to outwit the irrational. The screenplay was based on an actual account by Air Marshal Victor Goddard, who reportedly experienced a similar prophetic dream. Upon release, The Night My Number Came Up was well received in Britain, with many critics calling it a thinking man's thriller. It wasn't a blockbuster, but it developed a strong reputation over time, especially among fans of restrained British suspense cinema. The Guardian later noted, "It's a film that creeps up on you, like the dream itself, and Redgrave ensures you believe every moment." In this quietly chilling drama, Michael Redgrave proves that suspense doesn't require screaming. It only requires believing. And in his poised, layered performance, we see a man who dares to defy fate, even when the clouds are closing in. Time Without Pity, 1957.
Alec. Well, there must be something I can do. I'll study the transcript. I'll get more time. And you mustn't give up.
Why not? What difference would it have made if you had died when you were my age?
Alec.
In 1957, audiences witnessed Michael Redgrave in one of his most urgent, emotionally raw roles, Time Without Pity, a taut British thriller where every second ticks louder than the last.
Your husband, a man like Robert Stanford, threatened to commit suicide because of a breath of scandal. I don't believe you. You're lying.
No, I'm telling you the truth.
You're lying. You lied in the witness box, and you're lying now.
Directed by the blacklisted American filmmaker Joseph Losey, the film is a brisk, intense, and morally charged noir, and Redgrave stands at its center, a desperate father battling time, guilt, and the English legal system. It's not just a crime story. It's a study of regret, redemption, and the unbearable weight of a life half-lived. The plot: Redgrave plays David Graham, a recovering alcoholic and failed writer who returns to England after years abroad, only to learn that his estranged son, Alec, has been convicted of murder and is scheduled to hang in just 24 hours. Racked with guilt over years of absence and parental neglect, David sets out on a one-man mission to prove his son's innocence. What follows is a tense and emotionally draining odyssey through London's upper crust, where everyone seems to be hiding something and the truth is just out of reach. Redgrave's performance. This role required something different from Redgrave: emotional urgency, physical exhaustion, and relentless pacing. Gone is the cool, composed English gentleman. In his place is a man fraying at the edges, sleepless, remorseful, and battling the clock. Redgrave's portrayal of David Graham is gripping. He staggers, pleads, and lashes out, not as a polished hero, but as a man cornered by his own failings. One of the most poignant moments comes when David breaks down in front of his son, saying, "I came back too late, didn't I?" It's not just about the case anymore, it's about years of lost fatherhood. The New York Times praised the performance as one of Redgrave's finest, an actor of restraint now burning with righteous desperation. Time Out. London called the film a noir with a conscience, elevated by Redgrave's brilliantly anguished portrayal of a man trying to make amends in borrowed time. BFY, British Film Institute, highlighted it as a milestone in post-war British cinema, where performance and direction merge into something deeply human and political. Redgrave, who was outspoken in his political views and deeply principled, was drawn to the script's moral urgency and anti-death penalty message. He reportedly took a pay cut to do the film. Much of the film was shot on location in London, with Redgrave required to deliver emotionally intense monologues in single takes, enhancing the film's real-time tension. Though a commercial modest success, the film was a critical darling, and Redgrave received particular praise in France and Italy, where the film played in art house cinemas for weeks. It was also one of the earliest films to show a flawed but sympathetic alcoholic protagonist without slipping into melodrama. Redgrave's performance helped set a new standard for portraying addiction and regret on screen. With a 7.1 IMDb rating, Time Without Pity remains a hidden gem in Michael Redgrave's filmography, often overshadowed by his more genteel roles. But among cinephiles and critics, it's regarded as one of his boldest performances. It showed that Redgrave didn't just do Shakespeare and drawing room dramas. He could rage, suffer, and run headfirst into moral fire. It was his personal best in modern realism, bringing every ounce of his classical training into the streets of Noir London. In the end, Time Without Pity wasn't just about saving a son, it was about saving one's soul. And Michael Redgrave made that journey unforgettable. The Quiet American, 1958.
Take a look. Take a good look around and see what a full drum of dialactum can do. Dialactum? Look, I want you to look. And why this of all hours? The shopping hour when the place is filled with women and children. What are you talking about? No, do you think your General Tay would call off the bombing because the parade was cancelled? No, this is much better than a parade. This is front-page news. The blood of women and children, that's real news.
Set in war-torn Vietnam during the dying days of French colonial rule, The Quiet American, 1958, unfolds as more than a political thriller. It's a slow-burning philosophical chess match, a romantic rivalry, and a haunting reflection on Western interference. At the heart of it all is Michael Redgrave, delivering one of the most morally layered performances of his career. The story, adapted from Graham Greene's controversial 1955 novel, was directed by Joseph L. Mankiewicz. Greene's book was a sharp critique of American involvement in Southeast Asia, but the Cold War-era film altered that message, muting its anti-war stance and leaning toward an anti-communist narrative. Greene despised this change, dismissing the movie as propaganda, but the transformation gave the story a new, if unintended, layer of intrigue. Redgrave plays Thomas Fowler, a weary British journalist who has lingered too long in Saigon. He's addicted to opium, disillusioned with his homeland, and clinging desperately to his young Vietnamese lover, Huong. Into his fragile life steps Alden Pyle, played by real-life war hero Audie Murphy, a clean-cut, idealistic aid worker whose mission hides covert political aims. Pyle's charm and naivety mask a dangerous certainty in his own vision for Vietnam's future. The tension between Fowler and Pyle is both political and personal. Pyle falls for Phuong, igniting a battle that is as much about love and loyalty as it is about ideology. Redgrave plays Fowler with exquisite restraint, sharp yet exhausted, manipulative yet wounded. His eyes betray heartbreak even when his voice is laced with deceit. Variety praised him for giving the role a deeply human quality, world-weary yet sensitive, while the New York Times noted that he made Fowler a man audiences could both sympathize with and question. Behind the scenes, the contrasts were deliberate. Murphy's clean, all-American image was set against Redgrave's more cynical presence to heighten their ideological clash. Some scenes were even shot on location in Vietnam, a daring choice in the 1950s that gave the film an air of authenticity. Redgrave himself admitted in interviews that Fowler's moral evasiveness fascinated him, calling it one of the most challenging roles of his career. While critics were divided, praising the performances but lamenting the softened politics, the film remains a fascinating Cold War relic. The Loneliness of the Long-Distance Runner, 1962.
Sports on the playing fields of the national playing.
You learn to trust yourselves, and we'll go on trusting ourselves, and then there'll be a little bit of trust all the way round.
That's what you think.
Understand that? Remember.
Blue-eyed boy, isn't he?
Well, you learn.
Whose bloody side are you on all of a sudden?
You don't get anywhere without effort, lad.
I'm no bleeding guinea pig for anybody.
In 1962, British cinema delivered one of its most defiant statements with The Loneliness of the Long-Distance Runner, a raw, rebellious challenge to the country's rigid class system. At the center was a working-class teenager, Colin Smith, played with fierce energy by Tom Courtenay, and looming over him was the institution that sought to shape him, overseen by Michael Redgrave in one of his most quietly menacing performances. Based on Alan Sillitoe's short story, the film follows Colin after he's sent to a borstal for a petty crime. There, the governor, played by Redgrave, notices his natural gift for long-distance running and sees a perfect opportunity. If Colin wins an upcoming race, it will serve as a public victory for the reform system. Through flashbacks, we learn about Colin's hard upbringing, his contempt for authority, and his growing realization that winning would mean surrendering to the very system he despises. In one of British cinema's most iconic acts of defiance, Colin deliberately stops just before the finish line, denying the institution its triumph. Redgrave's governor is a chilling embodiment of establishment control, polite, persuasive, and calculating. He never shouts, never threatens, but exerts his power through promises, systems, and expectations. His authority is all the more intimidating for being so calm. Critics praised the subtlety of his performance, calling it a portrait of power that wears a suit and tie, calm, controlled, and quietly dangerous. Director Tony Richardson deliberately cast Redgrave to contrast the unpolished realism of the young actors with the composed polish of the system they were resisting, describing his portrayal as beautiful and bloodless. Behind the scenes, Redgrave embraced the chance to step far outside his usual poetic leads, describing the role as a study in institutional indifference. Courtenay later admitted he was both awestruck and intimidated by his co-star's presence, recalling, "He didn't need to shout. He looked at you, and you froze." The final scene, Colin standing still on the track, and Redgrave's silent, stunned reaction, remains one of the most haunting moments in the film. The loneliness of the long-distance runner became a landmark of the British New Wave, a movement that stripped away cinematic gloss to tell uncompromising working-class stories. While Courtenay carried the narrative's rebellious energy, Redgrave gave it its moral weight, embodying the quiet, suffocating force of a system that prizes obedience over individuality. It's a reminder that sometimes rebellion isn't loud or violent. It's the simple, deliberate choice to stop running. To the world, Sir Michael Redgrave was the embodiment of British dignity. A knighted actor, master of Shakespeare, and patriarch of one of the most celebrated theatrical dynasties in history. On stage and screen, he radiated poise and control. But behind the applause and the polished image lay a far more complex man, one whose life was shaped by hidden truths, quiet resilience, and the constant strain of living in two worlds. In 1935, Redgrave married actress Rachel Kempson, a union built on shared passion for the theatre and a deep mutual respect. They would raise 3 children, Vanessa, Corin, and Lynn, each destined to make their mark on stage and screen, collectively earning the family the title of British acting royalty. To the public, it was a picture-perfect partnership. But in private, Redgrave carried a truth he could not openly speak. He was bisexual. In mid-20th century Britain, such an admission could mean ruin. Homosexuality was not only taboo, it was illegal, punishable by imprisonment and social exile. Within the theatre world, whispers of his discreet relationships with men existed, always in hushed tones, never acknowledged openly. Even those closest to him, including his children, only came to fully understand this side of him years later, through letters and personal reflections. Rachel knew and, in her quiet way, accepted the truth. Their marriage endured not through deception, but through an understanding of love that defied conventional labels. They remained devoted partners, bound by their family and their craft, even as Michael navigated a private life that had to be hidden from the public eye. The need for secrecy took a toll. Redgrave endured bouts of depression, turning to journals, letters, and long solitary walks to wrestle with the parts of himself he could not express. His son, Corin, would later describe him as a man divided against himself. The conflict between who he was and what the world demanded seeped into his performances, giving them a depth and emotional truth that critics often praised but never fully understood. It wasn't until nearly 2 decades after his death in 1985 that the fuller picture emerged. Alan Strachan's 2004 biography, Redgrave, The Mask and the Face, revealed private letters and diary entries that spoke of longing, guilt, and the ache of concealment. These were not the confessions of a man living a double life out of deceit, but the reflections of someone forced to protect his career, his family, and his freedom in an unforgiving era. There was no public scandal in his lifetime. His secret was one of those open secrets politely ignored by the establishment, but the weight of it was written in his eyes, in the gravity of his silences, and perhaps in the haunting intensity that became a hallmark of his acting. He was a man who, even off stage, had to perform a role, the version of himself the world would allow. Looking back, his life is not just the story of theatrical triumphs, but also of quiet courage. He faced a world that demanded masks and managed, despite the strain, to leave behind performances of rare brilliance. In many ways, the depth of his artistry may have been born from that inner tension. His legacy is not only that of a great actor, but of a man who lived with unspoken truths and still found a way to turn them into art that endures.